Sometimes it's best to just rip off a colleague or a friend, well, especially when they're a really good writer like Joe Starkey, who wrote in his column in the Post-Gazette yesterday, and I'll just read directly from it. I have no shame in it. Joe writes, I'm thinking it's a positive development that the Steelers have won 2 in a row and are actually in playoff position 6 games into the season. That doesn't mean they're great or even good or even mediocre. I don't know. It just means a lot of people had them buried at 1-3 with a quarterback who looked 39 going on 80 and a playbook that had shrunk to the size of a Post-it note, and now they're not buried anymore, and that's a good thing, right? He asks. Is it a good thing? I think it is. 3-3, somehow not coughing up games to Teddy Bridgewater and Geno Smith, despite some struggles in the second half against both teams. This is much better 3-3 going into the bye week than 2-4, 1-5.
Well, yeah, look, the Steelers' floor is 5-12 in my estimation, with Ben Roethlisberger as the quarterback, because he's not going to let him only win 1 or 2 games. The Steelers' ceiling with Ben Roethlisberger as the quarterback is 9-8, make the playoffs, lose the first-round playoff game. I don't think they're going to win a playoff game. That is the varying degrees of what the Pittsburgh Steelers can be this year, in my estimation. 5 wins or 9 wins, right around there. But if they are at this point, if it's not at 2-10, and you have five games left, right? That would be 2-10 and 5 games left. I don't think I can find it within myself to root to lose the rest of them so as to get the first pick or the second pick. Like, if they're 3-3 and they got a shot to get into the playoffs, I can't figure out this mentality by some. And I think it's a small but vocal minority right now that are like, what are we doing this for? Okay, and then I counter with, what are we doing this for? Aren't you trying to develop corners? Aren't you trying to see an offensive line that develops throughout the year? Like, if you're not in it to win at this point when it's 3-3, again, what are you doing this for? And that's where I am. The people that are shouting, well, what are you going to accomplish anyway this season? Like, isn't sports about trying to go out and win?
Yeah, and getting to the playoffs. And maybe you don't win a game, but you get there at the very least. And the instant retort you would get from some people is, oh, so Mike Tomlin can keep his streak alive of never having a losing season. Well, yeah, I don't think there's any shame in that. I don't think there's any shame in never having a losing season. That is a positive, especially when you've got a 39-year-old quarterback who can't move anymore, and your offensive line is a work in progress at best. And some of the pieces on your defensive side of the ball that you count on to make big plays haven't made a ton of big plays yet this year. I mean, yeah, if this team goes 9-8, even if they miss out on a wild card berth, I will look at it and go, man, that's better than I expected after week 3. That's a damn sight better than I expected after week 3 or week 4.
I think if you're a fan and you go week to week, how can you not root for your team to win and get mad when they play poorly? And yet I guess somehow if they end up losing, then you can rationalize, okay, well maybe they'll get a better draft pick.
I can't do that until they're 2-10.
Right. I agree with that because I think what we've seen so far, I'm pretty sure that's what we're going to get, somewhere between 7 and 10, and maybe 10 and 7, but probably more toward the 8 and 9, maybe 9 and 8 kind of thing. Because I think that's what we're going to get. I thought from a positive standpoint that the offensive line coming together and taking those so-called baby steps, but man, they took a step back this last game, which kind of leads me to think, maybe maybe there's some hope here to. Well, the offensive line, they should have been better.
But isn't that what it's going to be all year when you're an 8 and 9, 9 and 8 team? It's going to be a step forward, maybe a step back, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back.
To that end, try this one on. I turn on in the afternoon, and I'm not here to say that they're just so negative sometime in the afternoon. They are. I turn it on at 2:30. I turn it on at 4 o'clock, and it's just negative after negative after negative. And I listen, but it's hard for me sometimes. Many people, them included, pick the Steelers to go 9-8 or 8-9, I believe, right? Many people in this town, 9-8 or 8-9. The Steelers are 3-3 after 6 games, and many of the same people are complaining about the win on Sunday night. I mean, if you project it out, isn't this team exactly what we all thought? So what's the issue right now?
I think, look, I'm never going to begrudge someone for watching a game, even a win, right? And we had this conversation with Ed a little bit yesterday. I'm never going to begrudge someone from watching a game, even a victory, and saying, okay, yeah, but there's this, and that. I just am choosing to look at it differently because my expectations are not for this team to challenge for a Super Bowl. It's not. As soon as they decided they were going to commit to Ben Roethlisberger, I could tell you they were going to be a playoff team at best. That aside, they have decided to go that direction, and so I will take a playoff appearance as some sort of small victory, and I will look at games like the win against Denver or the win against Seattle, and instead of going, yeah, they won, but I'll go, yeah, you know what? They looked shaky at times, especially in the second half, but they still won the game. I know it's against Bridgewater. I know it's against Geno Smith and a backup running back in Alex Collins, but despite looking terrible for the third quarter, they still won the game, and they're still 3-3, and they're still right there in the conversation, which if you're going to commit to bringing back the 39-year-old quarterback is a whole hell of a lot better than the opposite proposition of being 1-5 right now.
Well, I think you want to be you want the team to be relevant, and you want some entertainment every week. Now, the last two games got a little bit too entertaining at the end than they should have, but they're close, they're competitive, and yeah, should they have won games that they didn't? Yeah, maybe. Should they have lost games that they won? Maybe. But this is just kind of what it is.
The other part of this is that there is a pervasive philosophy amongst a lot of sports fans these days that they want their team to be one of two things, and they refuse to accept anything in the middle. They either want their team to be a championship contender, inarguably a championship contender, or they want their team to be in full rebuilding mode. Mm-hmm. And that's not just football. In fact, the NFL is probably the place where you find that the least. It's more in baseball, hockey, the NBA. That people want their teams. I either want to know my team is going to challenge for the title or they're tearing it all down and working towards the next title run. And that is the Pittsburgh Steelers, as much as they say their goal is a Super Bowl every year, the Pittsburgh Steelers, when they bring back a 39-year-old Ben Roethlisberger and put him behind a young, inexperienced offensive line, they are telling you, and a rookie running back and all that, they are telling you, hey, we're just trying to get to the playoffs and maybe we get hot. We're just that's all we're trying to do this year. And Steelers fans, or sports fans in general, can't accept that anymore, despite it being the best possible environment, the NFL playoffs.
That's the whole rub for me. They accepted it at the beginning of the season, and now it's like some big surprise it's happening. That's the part I don't get. We accepted it as a city. Hey, when we took calls, we saw the text line, Chris. We understood it. All right, Ben's coming back. All right, well, you know what? Every person that I talked to and everybody that gave feedback here to our show said, man, they're not going to be very good. Let's see what happens. Now let's see what happening is happening. And people are like, well, why aren't they this? Why aren't they that? Well, wait a minute. In August, you were the same people that said it was a 500 team. What the hell's your gripe now?
You know what it was? The team looked really, really bad for a couple of weeks, right? And everybody immediately jumped on the they're terrible bandwagon and wanted to. Honestly, nobody. It's hard to say this about fans, but nobody wants their team to stink. But some people wanted this team to stink the rest of the way so they would have a clear idea of what may be coming next. That's not going to happen. We knew going into it they weren't going to be 4-13. It just wasn't going to happen. They looked terrible for a couple of weeks, and maybe you thought that for a second, and you started to buy into it mentally.
You can push Ben out there in a wheelchair and in traction. He won't let them only win 3 or 4 games. He just won't let them do it.
And the ancillary pieces around him, especially Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, Freiermuth, they're not going to let it happen either. There's enough talent spread around that they're not going to go 4-13. But people they can't accept that it's going to be somewhere in the middle and it's going to be this up and down thing this year, and they just can't. They want their team to be one end of the spectrum or the other, and this team is not it.
And in the NFL, there is a football purgatory quotient to where they are now. It's not good. It's not a good place. Because then you turn into Indianapolis, right? Or someone like that. Or I'm trying to think of a better team. You just kind of float along. I think Indy might be a decent example where you just kind of go through. You might maybe make the playoffs. You don't really make a run. You're kind of in that middle. You don't want to be that for too long, but we haven't seen it here. They've kind of been that for a while anyway.
But on a one-year basis, again, this is the postseason atmosphere, the NFL's playoffs, that are most conducive to one of those teams somehow pulling it out. I mean, it's not just the 05 Steelers. It's not just the 2010 Packers. It's not just the 07. Wild card teams get hot sometimes. And when they do, they end up in a conference championship game, and they're a win away from somehow ending up in a Super Bowl. I'm not going to be crazy and say that can happen with this team, but that's what their hope is down there on the south side is let's just find a way to get into the playoffs, and who the hell knows what happens at that point.
There's so many injuries, too, and we talked about that, like in the division.
Key injuries.
Right, but we've seen that the Browns are starting to feel that. The Ravens, my goodness, I mean, they've played through it, and the Chargers, if their quarterback goes down, what do they have left? And we've all talked about Lamar Jackson, but the Ravens have had too many other injuries to deserve that happening. But it like we said, it seems like the season's been going on for 4 months already.
Yeah,
and we're not even at the close to the end of October really. So a lot's going to change between now and then. But if you can get, it's like, are you not entertained like from Gladiator? I mean, just be happy that your team is relevant still.